Regaining consciousness in the intensive care unit, the wealthy businessman overheard his wife's conversation on the phone. Upon learning about the will, he pretended to be dead. Chapter 1: The Awakening. Sebastian woke up suddenly, as if an invisible switch had flipped, restoring his consciousness. His body was still unresponsive, so he cracked his eyes open slightly and saw that he was in a room so white that it made him squint. "Lord, where am I, and why does my body feel so weak and powerless? How did I even get here?" he muttered. The answer to his question came in the form of faint squeaks from various sensors and devices a couple of meters away from the bed. Straining his consciousness, Sebastian realized he was in a hospital room, but how had he gotten here, and what exactly had happened? The dazzling light overhead hindered his concentration, and a buzzing in his ears made it sound like an alarm was ringing in his mind. His consciousness was immediately pierced by a severe bout of pain, causing him to groan softly. Suddenly, Sebastian felt an intense thirst, but there was no one to give him water right now, and there was no water within arm's reach either. There was no doubt that this was indeed a hospital room, but why was there so much equipment here? Sebastian had never been to such medical facilities before, so he had nothing to compare it to. Threads from IV drips and various sensors trailed away from his hands, and his body felt completely weightless. He didn't have enough strength to fully open his eyes, so he could only glimpse the world through slits. At first, the sounds seemed so muffled and distant that Sebastian doubted he could hear anything at all. But then, a very familiar voice sounded nearby, making his heart flutter with excitement. It was his wife Claudia's voice. Yes. There was no doubt the same intonation and slight catch in the pronunciation of some phrases gave her away completely. Sebastian suddenly tensed, trying to signal Claudia in some way when he heard the sound of the door opening. The businessman gathered himself, expecting to hear anything but this. "Doctor. Merritt, please tell me, how is my husband doing? Will he lie like a vegetable for long and suffer? Perhaps it's worth resorting to more radical measures," Claudia asked, adding a plaintive tone to her voice. There was a tense pause in the room for a moment, and then the attending physician replied, "I'll give you one piece of advice: don't anger God. Hope for the best. Your husband doesn't have much of a chance, but you can't give up. I also advise you to spend less time near him to avoid the possibility of accidentally infecting him with any infection. In case of any progress in treatment, you will be immediately informed. But for now, I strongly urge you to leave the room." "Okay, of course, you're right. Forgive me. I understand everything," Claudia sang in a syrupy voice. Shortly after, Sebastian heard the receding footsteps and the sound of a closing door, from which he concluded that the female doctor had left while Claudia remained standing by his bedside, lost in her own thoughts. Suddenly, the businessman distinctly discerned the melodious trill of a telephone ring in the intensive care unit. It sounded so unnatural that it made him doubt the reality of everything happening. He never liked eavesdropping and considered it a shameful and unworthy act for someone of his status. After all, he was the owner of one of the best restaurants in the city. If Sebastian were healthy right now, he would have definitely left the room and let Claudia speak without witnesses. But since he couldn't do that, he had to listen to everything from beginning to end. "Hello, darling, is that you? Your number seemed unfamiliar. Did you get a new one again? A will? Yes, I've written it, of course. Where will it go? Yes, I've already read it. Everything's just as I wanted, thanks to the notary who reviewed it. True, not for free, of course, but you have to pay for everything." "Yes, you know that," Claudia said. After his wife's words, Sebastian's heart raced with furious speed. Who was Claudia talking to so sweetly? She's not even speaking, just cooing. Is that even possible? And what exactly is she talking about? This will? But what she said next finally dispelled all doubts. "Yes, darling, I've just come into the room. Well, what can I say? My dear lies there like a vegetable. In general, no changes. I think based on this, I'll be able to manage the restaurant as I see fit. And when Sebastian is no longer there, then I'll inherit it as it should be. Well, I'll go now. Still have things to do, and I love you. Well, goodbye for now." Such audacity left Sebastian breathless. It's incomprehensible. Talking about her husband's imminent departure in his presence and even calling him a vegetable. Did he deserve such treatment? Meanwhile, lying on the hospital bed, Sebastian stubbornly couldn't understand why the sensors, which were supposed to inform the medical staff that he had regained consciousness, hadn't worked. He had seen something like this in one of the domestic movies. He couldn't remember the title, but the essence had been etched into his memory forever. However, it's one thing to observe from the sidelines and quite another to be the one involved, especially when your spouse has just betrayed you so easily. And Sebastian had no doubt that betrayal had occurred. But who saved him from the engulfing flames of the car? Who dared to risk their own life for him? At that moment, his consciousness clouded, returning him on the waves of memory to the event that occurred on that fateful day. Chapter 2: The Fateful Morning. The morning of the elite restaurant owner Sebastian White began as usual, hardly different from all the previous ones. As usual, he got up with the first rays of the sun when most of the city's inhabitants were still peacefully snoozing in their beds. From the windows of his house, there was an excellent view of the city, which was just beginning to settle into its usual daily routine. First, Sebastian made himself breakfast simple yet delicious and nutritious. He poured himself some orange juice and quickly fried eggs with bacon. Then he spent a few minutes doing gymnastics to fully awaken his body and get his muscles back to normal. Trying to lead a healthy lifestyle, he never insisted on his views and never forced his spouse to follow his example. Everyone is different, and Claudia was no exception. Sebastian, for example, was a vegetarian and didn't consume animal products. At the same time, he understood perfectly well that he had no right to judge people who ate meat. Taking a tray with prepared breakfast, Sebastian stepped out onto the spacious terrace and sat down at the table. Due to winter, the terrace was enclosed with a small fireplace crackling in the corner. Enjoying the fresh morning air in silence, he thought about the plans for the day to make sure he could accomplish everything that was planned. Claudia was still asleep at such times, which made Sebastian feel slightly lonely. After breakfast, the businessman dressed in his favorite business suit and headed to work. He always tried to arrive before opening time to see who arrived on time and who, on the contrary, was late. He didn't like lateness, although he didn't rush to judge those who did it out of necessity. Like the dishwasher Emily, who lived on the other side of the city and had to take the bus to get to work. Sebastian knew very well that the transportation on this route was very unreliable, especially in bad weather, when the city's usual rhythm was disrupted and municipal workers had to deal with the consequences of the elements. So it happened on that fateful day when snow began in the morning. At first it fell leisurely, swirling in miniature whirlwinds born from strong gusts of wind. Then it transitioned into an active phase, quickly dressing the roofs of houses in whitecaps. Sebastian loved such weather, although he knew that today's revenue would be weak. When a blizzard rages outside, city residents don't rush to restaurants to have dinner with a glass of something delicious and aromatic. Parking the car at the entrance, Sebastian raised the collar of his coat and momentarily left the realm of comfort and coziness. A sharp gust of wind immediately threw a handful of snow in his face, making him shiver and quicken his pace. The janitor Henry was already busy with his shovel, hurrying to clear the steps before the restaurant owner arrived. Seeing the owner, the elderly man raised his hand in a welcoming gesture. "Good morning, Mr. White. The snow's come today, of course, and it'll keep coming. It really makes your bones ache. Good morning, Henry. Are you still fighting the snow alone? I told the security guard to help you in such moments," Sebastian remarked. But the janitor just waved it off. "Oh, come on, it's fine. I can manage, Sebastian. I'm used to it, you know? It's like exercise for me. A couple of swings with the shovel, and my body feels normal again." The businessman smiled. "Exercise, you say? Well, hand me that shovel. I'll warm up right now and get the blood flowing." The janitor tried to protest, but the young manager stood firm and didn't calm down until he took away the much-needed tool from him. In the blizzard, people passing by the restaurant looked with surprise at the respectable businessman who skillfully wielded a shovel, clearing the steps of snow. Henry nodded respectfully. "I see you're quite skilled at this, Sebastian. Where did you get such extensive practice?" Sebastian smiled. "Where else? In the village, of course, at my grandfather's. On the distant outskirts, he had quite a lot of fishing there. I'm not much into hunting, you know, but picking mushrooms, berries, or fishing always up for that. So there was a lot of snow there in the winter. You'd wake up, and it's dark in the hut, all windows covered in snow. You take a shovel and go ahead." The janitor looked at the restaurant owner with undisguised sympathy. Sebastian was a good man. He never offended him with word or deed, and sometimes even stood up for him, especially in front of the administrator who enjoyed bullying those weaker than him. "I remember the scoundrel," Henry thought, but said aloud, "Mr. White, what are you doing? The wind is so strong and you're thinking of clearing snow. You'll catch a cold for sure. Where would we be without you then?" Andrew, the administrator, shouted over the wind from behind. Sebastian turned around and met the administrator's eyes, perfectly understanding that he was being deceitful and deliberately flattering him. "Oh, come on, Andrew. It's nothing. I'm not a kid, after all. Tell me, how are things at the restaurant? Suppliers didn't let us down, and are all the staff at work?" At the mention of the latter, the administrator grimaced as if from a toothache. Dancing on the cold wind, Andrew replied, "Yes, everything's in place, except for that dishwasher. What's her name?" "Emily, I think. No matter how much you scold her, she never comes to work on time." Sebastian looked disapprovingly at the administrator and, handing the shovel to the janitor, said, "Andrew, you very well know that Emily has 4 children. whom, by the way, she raises on her own. And I've asked you not to call her a dishwasher. Emily is a kitchen worker or a kitchen staff member. Learn to respect your subordinates. Without that, you can't build a proper workflow. The boss's remark sounded so sharp that the administrator shivered and sneakily glanced at the janitor. What if he heard? What a disgrace. Ah, he heard it loud and clear. Look at him grinning from ear to ear to ear. Shameless. Well, no matter, we'll sort it out. Let's just get rid of the boss first and then tighten the screws on everyone else. At that moment, a stooped figure of a young woman appeared from around the corner, hurrying as fast as possible to get to work, walking straight through the snow. Oh, here comes Emily Fisher. So what's the excuse this time? Did the bus break down, or did you come up with something more elaborate? The administrator started, but stopped under Sebastian's piercing gaze. Sorry, Mr. Brown, the bus got turned around on the road. Had to find alternatives, Emily replied apologetically, lowering her eyes, her nose red from the cold. All right, off you go and make sure everything is in order. Clean the dishes thoroughly so they squeak when I touch them, Andrew concluded with a stern look. Emily nodded and hurried towards the entrance door. At that moment, she awkwardly stumbled on a step, causing the sole of her boot to skid on the surface. Sebastian was the first to react, supporting Emily at the most dangerous moment. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry for being so clumsy, she began to apologize. Don't apologize, Emily. It's not your fault. But perhaps Andrew should finally get to work and sprinkle some salt on the pathway, Sebastian remarked, emphasizing the last word. After that, he took Emily's hand to help her ascend the slippery steps. Despite not wearing gloves, her palm felt very warm to the businessman. But then something very strange happened. Emily suddenly let out a loud gasp and jerked her tiny hand away. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Sebastian asked with concern. Emily guiltily lowered her gaze, clutching her hand into a fist. She looked frightened, not like herself at all. I'm sorry, please, it's not your fault at all. It must have been my imagination. Sorry again, Emily forced out, fear frozen in her eyes, a fear he could feel in his skin. But what was it about? What did Sebastian do wrong? Did he squeeze her hand too hard? No, it didn't seem like it. He shook his head in bewilderment, then hurried after Emily. The businessman caught up with her in the hall, where he quietly called out to avoid attracting the attention of others. Emily, what happened? Why did you react so strangely? She froze and looked at him with strange pity. I'm sorry, it's all because of my visions. What visions? Sebastian exclaimed in confusion. Emily paled. Well, the ones that come true, like premonitions, but real. They started back in school when I got a concussion during a PE class. We were climbing a rope and I fell. The height wasn't much, but that's when it all began. The businessman frowned. And what did you, may I ask, see in these visions? Tears suddenly filled Emily's eyes. It's a car accident. What color is your car? Dark green. When I touched your hand, I immediately understood that car will be involved in a terrible accident, but it won't be your fault. It will be someone very close to you. I saw it the moment I touched your hand. It struck me like lightning. Sebastian looked at his colleague with irony. He didn't believe in any prophecies, of course. In his understanding, it was sheer nonsense, and all these fortune tellers and seers were just charlatans. There was that one madam who predicted a long and thorny path to success for him back in his student years. And so what? The path did await, of course, but it required a great deal of hard work, and those predictions had nothing to do with it. Emily looked at her boss with concern, realizing he didn't believe a word she said. Excuse me, Mr. White, but I urge you to refrain from driving for the near future, she said. But he just smiled. Oh, don't worry, Emily. I've been driving for over 10 years and I've had no issues with it. Besides, I never exceed the speed limit, so there's no need for unnecessary concern. All right? An accident is definitely not in my cards. Emily nodded in agreement, looking at Sebastian as if he were already doomed. All right then, get back to work and don't dwell on the negatives. By the way, how are your little ones? If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I'll help however I can, said Sebastian as he headed to his office. Thank you. Everything's fine, Mr. White. I just need your permission for something, Emily cautiously asked. Permission? Of course, go ahead. What do you need? Sebastian replied. The dishwasher hesitated for a moment as if gathering her strength, then said, I want to ask for your permission to take home the dishes that customers rejected. Just one or two. I'll pay for everything. Don't worry. Can it be deducted from my salary? Sebastian smiled. Yes, of course. What's the matter? And no payment is necessary. They're going to be disposed of anyway. Besides, it seems both you and the kids will benefit. And take as many as you want. It's just leftovers. joyful sparks danced in her eyes. This was real luck. Meanwhile, Sebastian went about his usual business, talking on the phone with the restaurant manager, approving menus, and preparing for the inspection, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Yet from time to time, he remembered Emily's words, which had struck a chord with him. Can you believe it? A kitchen worker with fortune-telling abilities. That's a first for me. But soon, thoughts of a possible road accident faded away, making room for meetings with new suppliers, tasting new dishes, and discussing current restaurant matters with the administrator. Maintaining an atmosphere of trust and cooperation, Sebastian gently resolved disputes, using the stick far less often than the carrot. Time passed unnoticed, crossing the 3-hour mark. The fury of the storm still raged, but its morning impact had diminished. The city's utilities surprisingly quickly took control of the situation and cleared most of the vital roads. Although there was still an hour and a half left in the workday, Sebastian decided to leave early today. An interesting plan had matured in his mind regarding how he could fill this February evening with an aura of love and romance. Sebastian decided to pamper his spouse with a gorgeous bouquet of roses, a bottle of wine, and something delicious from his own restaurant kitchen. While the last 2 items didn't take him much time, searching for flowers in the snow-covered city turned into a real quest. To Sebastian's immense dismay, most of the flower pavilions were closed. Most likely, the owners of the stalls had decided that there would be hardly anyone interested in buying flowers on such a day. Just when Sebastian was almost losing hope, he noticed that one of the shops at the street corner was still open. With a joyous heart, Sebastian parked his car by the roadside and stepped inside. The pavilion smelled pleasantly of roses, tulips, and freshly imported mimosa. After all, it was the end of February on the calendar, meaning there were just under 2 weeks left until the beloved Women's Day. The salesperson turned out to be a rather nice girl who quickly helped Sebastian put together the bouquet he needed. The businessman's heart was singing, understandably so. Ahead of him awaited a romantic evening with his beloved, eagerly awaiting his return. Sebastian knew Claudia didn't usually prepare dinner for him, knowing full well he could satisfy his hunger at a restaurant. He took fruit and vegetable platters, champagne, and a couple of delicious dishes from Chef Frank, which he prepared just heavenly. Arriving home, the businessman didn't bother ringing the doorbell. He decided to open it with his own key. Stepping into the hallway, Sebastian heard subdued music coming from the bedroom. Claudia must be watching her series again, thought the businessman as he walked into the kitchen with the bags in his hands. He thoughtfully left the bouquet in the living room to give it to her a little later. With a joyful expression on his face, Sebastian entered the bedroom, and the hand with the bouquet with the bouquet involuntarily dropped, causing one of the roses to lose a couple of its petals. Claudia wasn't in the bedroom. Apparently she had left, leaving the TV on. But where did she go, especially in such a snowstorm? What if something happened to her? She's not confident behind the wheel, that's a fact. Of course, I need to see if the car is in the garage or not. A frantic thought flashed through his mind. Just as he was leaving the bedroom, Sebastian heard an urgent broadcast of local news about a foreign car falling off the city bridge half an hour ago, driven by an inexperienced girl. His heart raced faster. My God, it's Claudia, of course. Who else? I even transferred money to her card to buy a new dress. That's why she decided to buy it, he thought, getting into the car and rushing off like a man possessed. He sped towards the bridge. A couple of times, the car slid on the turn, but Sebastian managed to control it. His experience and knowledge of his Iron Horse's capabilities paid off. But Claudia, she's only recently started driving. Why did he even make her this gift? There were just under 2 miles left to the bridge when Sebastian's car slid again. He slammed the brake pedal to the floor, but there was no effect. For some inexplicable reason, the brakes failed, putting Sebastian in a life-threatening dilemma: swerve the wheel and go into the ditch or crash head-on into the small car parked on the roadside. Of course, he chose the first option, and after rolling several times in the distorted car, he crashed into a tree. The last thing he remembered was the sharp smell of gasoline from the damaged fuel tank, needing just one single spark to ignite it. And now he lies in a hospital room, hearing the persistent beeping of life support machines and pondering what happened. Of course, Sebastian had already guessed that he made a fatal mistake that evening, and the girl who fell from the bridge into the river was not Claudia at all. But when events unfold so swiftly, reason can no longer help. Only now did he realize that his wife had been meeting with her lover all this time, whom she valued above all else in the world. And then there was the will, right? How could he forget about it? Claudia herself had persuaded him to draw it up a couple of months ago. Back then, Sebastian didn't find it strange, but in light of recent events, it took on a completely different, alarming shade. The thought of such blatant betrayal by his wife stirred his consciousness, not allowing him to relax and accept the situation as it was. Deciding to pretend to be in a coma, Sebastian tightly shut his eyes so that Claudia wouldn't notice any signs of life in him. He could feel his wife's piercing, hateful gaze, her hands itching to press a few buttons and disconnect him from life support machines. The temptation to do so was so great that Claudia's hands literally trembled, and her lips merged into a single straight line. The most hurtful thing for him was that he couldn't prevent his wife from carrying out her plan. The danger was so close that he felt death's breath around his neck again. Fortunately, the sound of high heels clicking on the concrete floor echoed in the corridor, causing Claudia to hurriedly retreat. A minute later, the familiar voice of the attending doctor could be heard in the ward. "Oh, it happens. It's just mind-boggling. She's ready to bury him alive, you know. And why marry such vipers, doctor?" Merritt's conversation partner paused for a moment, then replied, "What's so surprising about it? They say this patient owns an elite restaurant in the city, and he has also made a will." From the tone of the speaker, Sebastian immediately understood that she was a nurse. At that moment, doctor, Merritt approached Sebastian's bed almost closely and remarked aloud, "Strange, some sensors are somehow disabled, Erica. Probably some malfunction. We need to call a specialist and let him see what's what. However, it takes time for a patient to come out of a coma. I'm sure he'll survive against all odds and prove that a miracle in such a case is quite possible." Erica nodded, and following the departing doctor with her eyes, began to deal with the capricious sensors. But before she could turn one of them on, Sebastian whispered quietly, "Water. Give me water." The nurse was startled by the unexpectedness of it, almost jumping in place. "So you've woken up. Why didn't you signal?" Sebastian gathered his remaining strength and whispered, "Please don't tell anyone that I've regained consciousness. Of course, we won't be able to deceive the attending physician, but let it be a secret at least for today." Erica pondered. The patient's request sounded very strange, although considering his wife's behavior, it didn't seem out of the ordinary to her anymore, especially since Sebastian asked her to keep the secret just now. "All right, I'll do everything, but you still can't drink. The most I can do is moisten your lips," Erica whispered to the patient. Sebastian tiredly closed his eyes, realizing that the nurse was right. And 5 minutes later, a wet piece of cotton soaked in water touched his lips, containing the much-needed moisture. Trying to quench his thirst even a little, Sebastian gently parted his lips to squeeze the cotton tip full of precious liquid. Naturally, it was too little, but Sebastian didn't insist. The main thing was that he stayed alive and didn't burn alive in the flaming car. While Sebastian pondered this issue, Erica set up an IV drip to provide his body with nutrients. Tears of gratitude glistened in Sebastian's eyes as he saw how caring she was and how she tried to help despite everything. "No, they won't get my will and inheritance. I will definitely recover and not give Claudia a penny in the divorce," he thought, becoming more convinced of the fairness of his own words. With difficulty swallowing the lump rising in his throat, Sebastian closed his eyes and sank into a sweet sleep. Chapter 3: The Revelation. At the same time, the nurse entered his treating doctor's office and told everything as it was. "Doctor." Merritt listened silently, understanding that her subordinate wanted to do what was best and didn't pursue any personal agendas. "Well, I won't tell his wife that there's progress in his treatment. If I were in her place, I'd be praying day and night for my husband's recovery. But this witch only thinks about grabbing her inheritance. Thank you for being vigilant and doing a good job, Erica." Joyful sparks lit up in the nurse's eyes. It's not that Sebastian was particularly attractive to her. It's just that the desire to help outweighed everything else. At the same time, Claudia showed up at the restaurant and began to set her own rules there. Being naturally fiery red, she resembled a fury sweeping everything in her path. Taking advantage of her husband being in a coma for the 3rd week now, Claudia decided to take control of the establishment. Her cold and harsh gaze pierced through each employee, harboring sincere indifference and contempt towards their personalities. The head chef was the first to get a scolding, receiving a reprimand and a fine for preparing dishes with too expensive ingredients. "Mrs. White, but it's not like that. It's long been known that the quality of ingredients affects the final result," the man protested. The business lady's cheeks flushed with anger. "Don't you dare talk back to me. Hear what I say goes. And anyway, from now on, decisions are made only by me. If you don't like it, go work in a roadside diner. Your talents will be more suitable there." "All right, Mrs. White, I understand," the head chef said gloomily, lowering his head. Andrew smirked. He liked the new manager much more than the previous one. Sebastian had been soft and attentive, while Claudia favored an aggressive approach to running the restaurant business. Approaching her much like a jackal during a lion's feast, the administrator remarked, "Mrs. White, if I may suggest for added effect, you should consider utilizing hidden surveillance cameras." Claudia looked at Andrew with surprise, clearly fond of him. And are there such cameras here? The administrator smiled contentedly. Of course. How else? True, mister. White didn't like to watch the videos and only resorted to them in cases of extreme necessity. More often than not, the cameras are simply turned off. But after the boss had the accident, I keep them on. It's immediately evident when someone is in their element, unlike the lax management of my dear husband. But such tricks won't fly with me. Well done, Andrew. Your idea with the cameras is simply invaluable, Claudia exclaimed, eliciting a satisfied smile from the administrator. A few minutes later, Claudia started the recording and leaned in to monitor every move of the staff. At first, she couldn't spot anything interesting. Waitresses bustled around the hall, the head chef commanded in the kitchen, and the waiter greeted clients at the entrance. Everything was as usual until Claudia noticed yesterday's recording of a young dishwasher with a bulky bag in her hands. Look at her, so clever. What could she possibly carry in such a bag? Probably empties the fridge before leaving and takes it all home, and all this right under the nose of my foolish husband, Claudia muttered. Upon closer inspection of Emily, Claudia decided to catch her red-handed. Let's see how you sing when I corner you. Unfortunately, poor Emily had no idea that she had been under close post surveillance for some time now. Time dragged on deliberately slowly, approaching the inevitable moment of reckoning. At the end of her shift, Emily grabbed a few leftovers approved by the head chef and headed towards the exit. She had done this before, ever since Sebastian allowed her to take home some of the untouched dishes. But today, everything initially took a different turn. Seeing Emily with a canvas utility bag in her hands, Claudia approached the doorway triumphantly and said, "And where do you think you're going, dear? Scooped up a bag full of delicacies and intend to just leave my restaurant like that?" Emily flinched and looked at the hostess with a hunted gaze, genuine sadness and despair evident in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. White, but I haven't stolen anything. These are just leftovers, you know, the ones that were paid for but remained untouched by the customers." The businesswoman sneered contemptuously. "Untouched, you say? And who decides that? Could it be you, sweetheart? You seem to have a good deal for yourself. What do we have here? Oh, a Caesar salad. Too bad, only half, but it doesn't change the essence. You're quite the gourmet, dear." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She least expected the obnoxious accusation to turn everything upside down so easily. "Oh, please, no need to cry, okay? Your crocodile tears are of no use to me. Understand? Once you lose your job, you can shed them every minute if you want," Claudia remarked rather harshly. Emily sniffled sadly and began rummaging through her bag. What made it even more upsetting was that just half an hour ago she had paid for these dishes with her future salary. Now she faced dismissal on charges of theft she didn't commit. "Oh, looks like we caught a fish in the net, and the surname matches Fisher. And you were still hoping for the boss," remarked the approaching administrator. Claudia exchanged a meaningful glance with Andrew and continued to scold Emily. "But I didn't take it for myself. It was for the kids," pleaded the woman. "Oh, don't scare me with your family drama. I couldn't care less about how many you have, 3, 4, or 5. It's your business. You gave birth to them. Deal with it yourself," Claudia snapped bitterly. "She only has 2 of her own and 2 more from her husband's first marriage," the administrator added obligingly. "They're all mine, and as for what my husband left, let it remain on his conscience. He's in prison now, caught stealing. He thought the kids would help him reduce his sentence, but I managed to get his rights revoked," Emily muttered through tears. But Claudia remained unmoved. Honestly, what Claudia needed right now was a scapegoat to show her power to everyone else. Emily, who had the misfortune of being caught in the crossfire, became just that. "So how about you, Fisher, right? Well, you're fired. You can go wherever you want," Claudia concluded, gesturing towards the door. Despair froze in Emily's eyes. Could this really be happening? Could she really be dismissed like some unwanted stray dog? The administrator, in turn, didn't want to stay on the sidelines and contributed his 2 cents to the matter. "Oh, and I almost forgot, Fisher, don't count on your salary, you understand? The money will go towards compensating the damages." The news was a devastating blow to Emily. Realizing that she had been deceived by everyone who could, she went outside and exposed her heated cheeks to the freezing wind. Seeing this, Henry couldn't help himself and approached. "Aish, dear, don't cry. Don't torment yourself, sunshine. You know Andrew is in favor right now. That's why he's doing whatever he pleases. And when Mr. White recovers, his reign will come to an end. And so that you don't end up completely without money, I'll allocate some from my pension for you. You can repay it whenever you can. No rush," said the janitor, embracing the fragile woman by the shoulders. "Thank you, Henry, for your support and protection. You see, I was counting so much on this money and then this happened. We're struggling with the kids in a rented apartment. and the landlady keeps raising the rent, saying you receive child benefits so you won't become poor." Emily replied, choking back tears. The elderly man shook his head. He felt sorry for Emily, to say the least. Such a good colleague, calm, diligent, never speaks ill of anyone. She washes dishes up to her elbows in hot water, and that's it. And this Andrew, the administrator, is a first-rate troublemaker. Henry remembered him from his work at the high school, where he had been a craft teacher for over 40 years. So this Andrew, when he was a student, behaved extremely insolently, humiliating those who were poorer than him or physically weaker. Henry once tried to shame Andrew, but it was all in vain. And then, one dark night, the workshops for practicing crafts caught fire. Many blamed Henry, saying he didn't put out his cigarette properly, but he had never smoked in his life and always observed fire safety precautions. The mystery was unraveled with Andrew, who, in fact, had committed arson with a group of teenage friends. Henry couldn't prove anything at the time and was subsequently fired from the school with the corresponding note in his employment record. Overall, the dismissal didn't bother the crafts teacher too much, as he was formally retired by then and had no bread left on his plate for sure. After 17 years had passed since the incident, by the twist of fate, Andrew and the elderly janitor crossed paths again, though in quite different capacities now. Of course, Andrew pretended not to recognize his former teacher, but Henry Brooks was no fool and had seen far too much in life to take Andrew at his word. However, Sebastian appealed to him, honest, kind, fair, just the kind of leader he should be. Clutching the money given by Henry, Emily slowly made her way towards the bus stop to catch her needed bus on time. Memories of the recent snowstorm loomed on both sides of the road, with dirty gray mounds of snow that had fallen several weeks ago, lost in her somber thoughts. Emily trudged along the street when suddenly she heard a muffled murmuring. It turned out that she hadn't managed to distance herself from the restaurant by a decent margin, and thus she quickly turned around, thinking Henry was following her to say something, but there was no one behind her. A fairly brisk frost lingered, nipping at her nose and rosy cheeks as if caressing the attractive woman. The mysterious sound repeated, and Emily realized it was coming from the nearest snowdrift. Understanding that someone clearly needed help, she cautiously approached and froze in shock. There lay a man with a bloody head, groaning softly and unconscious on the dirty gray snow. Emily's first thought was that the stranger had simply had too much to drink and had fallen, hitting his head. But when she leaned over the young man, she immediately realized he was sober as a judge. Without a second thought, Emily lifted the unfortunate man under his armpits and tried to get him on his feet. He was gradually regaining consciousness, indicating that the initial shock from the injury was wearing off. "Damn, how could this happen? Bastards! Don't touch Jack," the man muttered deliriously. Meanwhile, Emily, stooped under the weight of the stranger's body, led him to Henry's shed. Thinking that the injured man was simply delirious, she tried to ignore his muttering and persevered towards their destination. The man she had rescued was definitely a vagabond and could have frozen to death on the streets in such bitter cold. Seeing the flushed Emily, Henry understood everything without words, taking the man from the other side. He and Emily quickly laid him on the cot, which had once been a folding sofa. "Well, that's better. Now let's treat the wound on his head. He'll probably recover soon," Henry sighed in relief, taking out bandages, cotton, and antiseptic from the first aid kit. "Can you manage? Shouldn't we call an ambulance?" Emily asked anxiously, but the janitor just shook his head. "No, dear, there's no need. Why distract people from more important work? I wanted to be a doctor in my youth, but I failed the entrance exams. Then I spent a year and a half in medical school, decided to become a nurse, but even there, luck wasn't on my side, so I had to become a laborer, Emily. But I know how to provide first aid, so don't worry. The lad is tough, street smart. He'll pull through, no doubt." Emily's face immediately lit up with a sweet smile as the wounded man opened his eyes and began to turn his head from side to side, trying to understand where he found himself. "Easy there, buddy, easy. Sudden movements aren't recommended for you right now. Just lie down and regain your senses. Do you at least remember your name?" Henry cautiously asked. The guy forced a smile. "Of course I do. Connor. That's my name. Sawyer, the last name. Got beaten up because of a dog. These rich kids wanted some fun with a victim, and they chose the dog, Jack. He's a street dog, you know. He settled near the meat pavilion, not afraid of people. So when I saw that villainy, I immediately rushed to help. I took down 2 on the snow, but the third one, the jerk, hit me on the head with something." Henry nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, that kind of thing happens. Don't worry. Stay here as long as you need. I have firewood and a little stove here. You'll be as comfortable as can be." Connor gratefully looked at Emily, who didn't pass by and helped him in his difficult moment. Sneaking a glance at her watch, she sighed sadly. Well, looks like I'll have to take a taxi now. There go my savings. I've already missed the bus. Connor sniffled with a guilty look and turned away to the wall, feeling it was because of him. The vagabond said, "Forgive me, for God's sake. I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. I've been having quite the adventures lately. 3 weeks ago, I pulled a rich guy out of a burning car. Maybe you heard about it. It was quite a loud incident." Emily paled and involuntarily looked at her palm, remembering what happened to her during the revelation regarding Mr. White's future. "We heard, Connor. That was the restaurant owner, you know." "Well, the one Emily and I used to work for," Henry replied for both of them. "We don't work there anymore. At least I don't," Emily corrected him immediately. The guy shook his head sadly and winced from the pain. His neck was stiff, and any slightly sharp movement caused a spasm. "Easy, my friend. Don't get agitated. And for saving our friend here, you deserve a special thank you. Sebastian was a very good person and probably still is." The janitor corrected himself. "I just happened to be there. It's not really my territory, you see. US vagabonds, we divide everything by districts, by yards. Step onto someone else's turf and you'll quickly get your ribs cracked, so you won't want to come back. But there I saw it. An accident. And a pillar of smoke rising from it. People were running around wailing, but no one was rushing to save the man. The gas tank could have exploded at any moment." The vagabond began his story. Henry looked at his interlocutor with undisguised respect. Deep down, he had long concluded that Connor was a good man. Otherwise, would he have rushed to the defense of a stray dog? Unlikely. Connor took a deep breath and, touching the wound on his temple with his fingers, continued, "As soon as I saw that someone could burn alive, I ran straight to the car. I smashed the glass with a cobblestone and started pulling him out of the car. And all around there was noise, chaos. People shouting that the fuel tank would soon explode. It was all true, but you can't just leave the driver. Anyway, I made it, dragged him about 10 meters away, and then it went off. You, my friend, are a true hero to just throw yourself into the fire for our Sebastian," Henry said sorrowfully. Emily looked warmly at the rescued boy and caught herself thinking that all this seemed somehow not accidental. Connor saved Sebastian, she saved Connor. After that, it was hard to believe in coincidences. Since Emily couldn't delay any longer, she called a taxi and went home, where 4 hungry children were waiting for her: Nathan, Anna, Peter, and Emily. At the same time, Sebastian lay in a hospital bed, gradually coming to his senses. Of course, he still had little strength, and he could barely hold a spoon and fork on his own. Erica and Dr. Merritt kept their word and skillfully fooled Claudia for about 5 days, who had decided to disconnect her husband from life support machines and claim her rightful inheritance. On the 5th day, Sebastian called Erica over and asked for help with another scheme. "I need to leave for a short while. You understand?" The nurse looked at him incredulously, wondering if he was joking. Less than a week ago, he had come out of a coma, and now he was planning an escape. "No, Sebastian, excuse me, but I won't take such responsibility. What if something happens to you? What should I do then?" Stand trial, Erica objected. Desperation froze in Sebastian's eyes. "Well, help me be a human, will you? I'll sign any document you want about understanding the consequences and relieving the clinic of all responsibility." Erica shook her head negatively, although she understood in her thoughts that she couldn't refuse the patient. Claudia had been too unpleasant to her, rushing to get rid of her husband, not hesitating in her choice of means and accomplices. "Fine, I agree, but only if we go together, okay? It'll be calmer for both of us." Just in the evening, a couple of hours before lights out, the nurse suggested and immediately received an affirmative answer. Truth be told, Sebastian found it much more convenient himself, since he still didn't walk as confidently as before and could lose his balance at any moment. "Okay, Erica, but let's keep this between us. Not even Dr. Merritt should know, so that no one knows anything," the businessman pleaded, hopefully looking into her eyes. Erica nodded and began to prepare everything necessary for the breakout, taking with her medicines for emergencies and borrowing a walking stick from one of the clinic's patients. Meanwhile, Sebastian lay on the bed, gathering strength for the plan he had been considering for several days. Remembering Emily in his thoughts, the businessman couldn't hold back his tears. God, she was right all along. She spelled it out so clearly, and I, the fool, didn't believe her. Now I'm paying for my carelessness. Yes, Claudia is also quite something. She got herself a lover and set her sights on my assets. Well, I'll settle the score with her, that's for sure. Although not with the same barbaric method she employs, the businessman thought with despair, closing his eyes and pretending to be a man who had fallen into a coma. Time stretched like rubber. And when Erica finally appeared in the ward with a set of clean clothes, Sebastian realized there was no turning back. "Here, get dressed. These are my ex-husband's things. We've been divorced for a long time, but he never bothered to take them. I think they'll fit you." Erica explained with a smile. Sebastian changed as quickly as he could, staggering under the weight of exhaustion, and followed the nurse. The injuries from the accident were definitely taking their toll, forcing Sebastian to stop every 300 feet to catch his breath. It's worth mentioning Erica's understanding of his weakness. She did her best to support him, minimizing his time spent outside. Additionally, she hired a private driver who didn't rush and didn't ask unnecessary questions when faced with a weary client with a wooden stick in his hands. Arriving at his home, Sebastian felt overwhelming anxiety. The drum beat pounding in his ears, Erica looked at him with concern, but it was too late to turn back now. Sebastian was simply obligated to finish what he had started. Only then would their efforts be justified, and no one would doubt their correctness and appropriateness. Stepping out of the car, he shivered in the cold wind and approached the door. He had his keys since they were with him, along with his wallet and smartphone at the time of the accident. Inserting the key into the lock, Sebastian tried to turn it, realizing it clearly didn't fit. Did Claudia change them? She adapted to the new reality quickly, I must say, Sebastian whispered, putting the useless key back in his pocket and pressing the doorbell. Instantly, a cheerful trill of a familiar melody filled the air. Erica stood a little aside, patiently awaiting the outcome. Soon, footsteps echoed from the depths of the house, and the door swung open, revealing the sturdy figure of Claudia's lover in Sebastian's own bathrobe. This bathrobe had been a birthday gift from Sebastian's late mother, and this jerk wore it without a shred of conscience. Stunned by such audacity, the businessman froze in place, challenging the lover with his gaze. "Who's there, darling? Not the utilities again, I hope. But I've paid everything in advance for a month so we could relax at the resort." Claudia's languid voice came from behind the stranger. Sebastian paled and clenched his fists painfully. Claudia understood everything instantly and, without being embarrassed by the presence of her lover, dropped to her knees. "Sebastian, please forgive me. It's not what you think. I swear I thought you had only a few days left. The doctor didn't make any prognosis and miracles don't happen, or do they, darling?" Sebastian ground his teeth and uttered through gritted teeth, "I'll give you 5 minutes to gather your things and leave this house." Claudia's lover straightened his powerful shoulders and looked mockingly at the homeowner. "Listen, unfinished businessman, go get yourself treated and don't interfere with normal people's lives. It's a pity you didn't crash back then." Sebastian clenched the handle of his cane so tightly that his fingers turned white. "You won't have to wait, you bastard. You thought you buried me alive, but I survived against all odds, and I'm sure that the accident was staged. I'll make sure to uncover the truth." At the mention of this, the bully immediately wilted and sadly wandered deeper into the house to change. The fairy tale of a rainbow relationship with Claudia ended as abruptly as it began, and now it was time for payback for everything that had happened. Of course, Sebastian couldn't prove Claudia's involvement in the accident, but instead, he deprived her of means of existence and blocked all her cards and accounts. Once upon a time, Sebastian had pulled Claudia out of provincial obscurity, doing everything to make her feel like a businesswoman. But after such betrayal, he couldn't forgive the traitor. Long ago, he saved Claudia from criminal prosecution for fraud she allegedly didn't commit. In reality, she was a hardcore criminal who only cared about enriching herself. Now, due to new circumstances, Sebastian called the investigator again and said that his ex-wife's case should be reopened and investigated. Upon hearing this, Claudia grabbed a heavy vase to hit her husband on the head, but Erica was vigilant and intercepted the fraudster's hand in time. At the same time, several police cars pulled up to the house, and officers in plain clothes, armed to the teeth, stepped out. For Claudia and her lover, it was all over. Sebastian, on the other hand, looked at his handcuffed ex-wife with a sad gaze and collapsed from exhaustion. Perhaps if Erica hadn't been there, he would have fallen into a coma again. But instead, he gently sank to the ground, supported by the caring hands of the young nurse. Sebastian didn't hear the wail of the ambulance anymore and woke up only the next morning, startled by the muffled voices. But this time, it wasn't his wife discussing his will with her lover. It was his loyal and trustworthy friends, the janitor Henry, the dishwasher Emily, and the homeless guy Connor. Upon closer inspection, the businessman immediately recognized the street hero who pulled him out of the burning car, wishing to remain anonymous. Embracing Emily by the shoulders, Connor haltingly explained that he had decided to disappear out of fear of excessive attention. As he listened to Connor, Sebastian found himself thinking that he definitely wanted to see him as the manager of his restaurant. A sentiment shared by Emily, who had earned a promotion to waitress or even assistant chef through her diligent hard work. However, she could choose whatever she needed. In any case, Sebastian was ready to fulfill any of their wishes. But first, he wanted to publicly confess his feelings to Erica, which had ignited in his heart during all the recent trials. Tears glistened in the nurse's eyes, and her response elicited a storm of applause from everyone present. Yes, I agree, but please, in the future, stay away from hospitals, she said. Connor smiled and, subtly winking at Emily, hinted very unmistakably that he was in solidarity with the young businessman and ready to become the father of her 4 children. Or perhaps even 5, who knows? If there was mutual respect and love, everything else would fall into place: weddings, pregnancies, and the joyful laughter of children.